Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining and welcome to the webinar today, where we'll be talking all about unlocking your productivity superpowers. So just firstly to introduce myself, I'm Ben, so I'm part of the sales team here at Mail Manager, but much more importantly, we're really excited to be joined by Grace Marshall. So for a bit of background on Grace, she is the author of the award-winning How to Be Really Productive. Grace Marshall is known for her refreshing human approach to productivity, featuring in The Guardian, Forbes, and Huffington Post, where her work as a productivity ninja with global productivity training company Think Productive has helped over 10,000 people replace stress, overwhelm, and frustration with success, sanity, and satisfaction. And with her new book, Struggle, which was shortlisted on the Business Book Awards 2022, she is here to start a new conversation about life's shittier moments, one that unlocks our creativity and resilience in the face of adversity and uncertainty. So thank you very much for joining us, Grace.
Oh, it's absolute pleasure, Ben. So yeah, really happy to be with you and to share some thoughts around what is productivity anyway? What do we do? What do we mean by that? But also what we can take away in terms of boosting our productivity. And I think we're going to then have a discussion a little bit on how productivity and technology go hand in hand. So this will be, I guess, a bit of me talking, but also encouraging you to ask your questions and to come in with your comments, and for Ben and I to have a bit of a discussion at the end. I think, is that the plan?
Sounds perfect.
Great stuff. Okay, so yeah, as Ben says, my name's Grace Marshall. So what I do is I write, speak, coach, and talk and train on productivity. So a lot of what I do is helping people in all sorts of different walks of life, in different roles, different organizations, different sectors, helping them to think about how do we do our best work? But also, how do we do our best work within the time that we have? And what do we actually even mean by productivity? So that's why I wanted to start with this question. What is productivity anyway? I wonder actually if we can invite those on the call live with us, if you could maybe just share one or two words on the Q&A. So I think the chat is disabled, but if you can share one or two words on the Q&A, tell me, what's your definition of productivity? What do you think it means? Okay. So Ben, what's coming up?
So we've got a couple of efficiencies and another efficiency and another working efficiency.
Excellent. So we've all been given the same hymn book. Excellent. So really interesting. I'm gonna challenge that a little bit today, because absolutely there was a time where productivity completely equated to efficiency, but I think we've moved on maybe a little bit from that. So even it's not a new quote. Even Peter Drucker himself said maybe there's a difference between effectiveness and efficiency. So there's a famous quote that he said, which is, "There's nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all." So maybe productivity isn't just about efficiency, which is about squeezing in as much as possible, getting as much done in the limited time that we have. Maybe it's also about effectiveness, doing the right things rather than just doing them well or fast, or doing them right. But I would actually say it goes beyond that. So it's also perhaps about our work-life experience. How do we do work in a way that does us good, as well as the good that we're doing out there in the world? How do we do work in a way that is sustainable, that's to the best of our human capacity, rather than just as quickly or as efficiently as possible? And so that's what I want to draw your focus onto today is, what does it look like to work to the best of our human capacity? What does that even look like? What do we mean by human capacity? How does it look, in a world where actually work never ends? Maybe productivity isn't just about getting to the end of everything, because let's face it, the work will carry on. There will always be more work to do. Maybe productivity isn't about squeezing out as much as possible. Maybe it's about finding this rhythm that, where we are as human beings are doing our best work to the best of our human capacity, but doing it in a sustainable way rather than crashing and burning. So when it comes to capacity, I think it's helpful to think about this in 3 different ways. We've got physical capacity, mental capacity, and emotional capacity. Physical capacity is typically how we do traditional time management. It's traditionally how we think about our time. So if I'm looking at my diary and somebody sent me a meeting request, for example, physical capacity is, can I physically fit this meeting into the diary? And if I can't, then I'm going to have to say no or move things around or something like that. But if I can, then I'm going to feel like, oh, I probably should say yes to this. So that's physical capacity. But the problem is that's quite an outdated way of thinking about our work. So Minouche Shafiq, who is the current director of the London School of Economics, she's also the former deputy governor of the Bank of England, she says that in the past, jobs are about muscles. Now they're about brains, but in the future, they'll be about the heart. So in the past, jobs are about muscles. And actually, a lot of our traditional time management thinking, a lot of our thinking around efficiency was born out of the days of Henry Ford. And that kind of efficiency was about, okay, we've got this many people, we've got this many slots on the conveyor belt, how do we get more things coming out of the factory for the amount of inputs we're putting in? That's how efficiency worked, and that's how traditional time management worked. But nowadays, actually, work is about the brain. So maybe it's not so much our physical capacity in terms of how much time we have for something, but maybe it's also to do with our mental capacity. And actually, one of the things that we can start thinking about our work in terms of is, hang on, we don't do that kind of factory line work anymore, do we? We don't do the kind of work where all we have to do is show up and physically put stuff into motion. Even those of us who work with our hands, a lot of us are actually knowledge workers, which means that the value that we create comes from the thinking that we do. It's the ideas that we have. It's the decisions that we're making. It's, Ben, if you're going into a sales meeting, it's the quality of the conversation that you're having or the clarity of the message that you're presenting. And so that means that maybe it's not so much the amount of time that we have that matters, but actually the quality of our attention. And in fact, I would argue that time without attention is completely useless. So let me share a couple of studies with you. One was done at Microsoft in 2004, where they had a bunch of people working on something that required a certain level of mental investment. So they were writing reports, designing software, fixing bugs in the code, and they interrupted them with 1-minute interruptions. So imagine somebody coming up to your desk saying, hey, have you got a minute? Imagine a 1-minute email or a 1-minute phone call. Even if genuinely the interruption only took a minute to deal with, any ideas how long it would take you to recover your attention and get back to the thing that you were doing before? Those of you on live on the call, let us know in the Q&A panel. Ben, have you got any guesses on this?
4-5 minutes.
You reckon 4 or 5 minutes?
Maybe that's generous. We've got a pretty good range. Dan reckons 3 minutes. Some other people not so confident. 30 minutes is the biggest one we've seen so far, and a couple of 15-20 minutes.
Okay, so in this particular study, the Microsoft one, it was 15 minutes. 15 minutes to recover from a 1-minute interruption. That means it would only take 4 badly timed interruptions to suck up a whole hour of your day. A more recent study in 2014 actually found that the recovery time there was more like 23 minutes and 15 seconds. So then it only takes 3 badly timed interruptions to suck up a whole hour of your day. So maybe sometimes when we don't have enough time, what we actually, when we feel like we don't have enough time, what actually we don't have enough of is our attention to make good use of our time. So we've got a poll, and I'd love to know who or what distracts you most from getting things done. What are some of your culprits that steal some of your mental capacity?
So we've got a couple of answers trickling through. I'll just leave those up for a couple more seconds, and a pretty widespread group here. So
I can imagine, because it's multiple choice, someone might be going through ticking all of them as well.
Quite possibly. So if I end this poll, I'll just share those results here. I don't know if you can see those, Grace.
Yeah. So we've got 21% phone calls, 58% is our highest, that's on emails. 50% people, 25% social media, 33% on either Teams or Slack. So that kind of internal messaging system. Safe to say, it's a noisy world out there. There are lots of things vying for our attention. And that's the interesting thing about communication technology, is that in enabling us to be able to potentially communicate anytime, anywhere, instantly, we've also created a lot of distraction for ourselves. So when it comes to managing your distraction, protecting your attention, maybe managing your mental capacity, it might be considering, okay, where do I need to maybe reduce some of these distractions? So for example, do I need to silence some of those pings and notifications? Because let's face it, as human beings, we are wired to respond to stuff that ping and pop up. So if you've got that little email notification that says, hey, look at me, even if you scan it and go, oh no, it's not from anyone important, that's fine. It's already stolen a little bit of your attention. So maybe we can start to look at which notifications can I turn off and not have that instant notification on? Which ones am I happy to self-serve and help myself? Like, I'll look at it when I'm ready to, rather than I'll look at it as soon as it arrives. It might also be practicing what we call in productivity ninja terms, stealth and camouflage. So stealth and camouflage is about maybe sometimes making ourselves slightly less available. So it might be physical stealth and camouflage. So if you work in an open office, it might be going somewhere else. Hiding in a meeting room, or maybe going to work offline, digital stealth and camouflage. So it might be putting your Teams status onto do not disturb, going dark, maybe even putting Outlook onto work offline. It does have an offline mode. So little things like that might be about managing your availability and your attention. So there might be certain times when you have your brain to yourself, but then other times when you're fully available, rather than being constantly available. Because if we're always available to everyone, we're never really fully available for anyone. So it might be about managing, who do I have attention for right now? Is it for the rest of the world, or is it just for me? And my guess is, for most of us, the kind of work that we do, we need a balance of both. So it's not about completely going dark all the time. If you go missing in action, they'll come and find you. But maybe it is about time to time activating some of that stealth and camouflage. Now, the cognitive load, the mental load, the load on our capacity, also comes from the amount of decision making that we have to do. So if you think about the items on your to-do list, all the things that you might have, chances are it's not just stuff you need to do, it's also stuff you have to think about. It might be, okay, I need to do something about the website, but actually, what's the thing I need to do here? So it's, your to-do list may not just be a set of instructions of press this button and do that thing. It might involve some decision making, it might involve some defining, some thinking, some planning. And that is also what contributes to our cognitive load. The problem is our decision-making capacity is finite. So there are only so many decisions that we can make in a day before we get to the point where we go, oh, I can't think anymore. I can't make a decision. And that's when we hit what's known as decision fatigue. In fact, this came from a study of parole board judges, where they looked at how often would they say yes to parole and how often would they say no to parole. And at the beginning of the day, your chances of getting parole were about 60%. As the day went on, what do you think happened? It went less. After a break, it went back up again. Just before lunch, you've got no chance. After lunch, better chances. End of the day, no chance. So if you're ever up for parole, you want to go after lunch, not before lunch. But probably a more wider application that we can have for all of our work is, what does decision fatigue look like for us? So if you've ever had one of those days when you've made lots of really good judgment decisions at work, and then you go home and think, what the heck am I going to have for dinner? And that's the decision that floors you. That's exactly what decision fatigue feels like. But also, if you think about the kind of, if you think about the way that you've got your work scheduled, if you've got back-to-back meetings, for example, throughout a day, how able are you to make good judgment decisions at the end of the day when you're in that last meeting, when everybody's knackered and you're like, oh, I can't really think? And in fact, one of the companies that I did some work with a little while ago that had maybe, a bit of a meetings addiction culture, they said, oh, I know exactly what happens. Nobody can make a decision. And so we all go around and go, let's schedule another meeting. And so that just exacerbates the problem. So what can we do about this? Well, maybe next time you're thinking, can I fit this meeting into the diary? Rather than just thinking, does it physically fit in? You might be thinking, do I have the mental capacity to do this thing justice? Am I going to be able to give it my, my brain as well as my presence, whether that's physical or digital? But the other thing we can look at as well is, how can we maybe reduce the amount of decisions we're making or eliminate some unnecessary decisions? And this might come from things like routines and processes and checklists, so we're not reinventing the wheel every single time. It might also come from places where we go, actually, does it really matter? Could I maybe delegate that decision or let somebody else decide rather than me having to decide myself? One famous example is Barack Obama's suits. Don't know if have you heard of this one, Ben?
I've not, no.
No. So Barack Obama famously only had 2 types of suits when he was in office. And when he was asked about it, he said, well, if I don't have to make a fresh decision every single day about what am I going to wear today, if I've only got 2 suits to choose from, then that reserves my decision-making capacity for some of the more, more impactful and important decisions that I have to make in my role. So it might be looking for, where am I making too many decisions? Where have we maybe got too much variety and too many options going on? I remember when we first, as a training company at Think Productive, when we first started doing everything online, at the beginning of the pandemic, where everything shifted, what we noticed was we were just trying to make it work. So, Zoom was our preference, but if somebody else needed to use Teams, we could try Teams. Other companies might be like, oh, well, we're still using like GoToWebinar, or we're using Adobe or something else. So we were like, yeah, we'll work with whatever you've got. And then what we noticed was, hang on, we've got a lot of different platforms, a lot of different options. Is this a meeting? Is this a webinar? Is this being recorded or not recorded? Too many options meant that mistakes were being made, and we were hitting decision overload. And sometimes our clients were as well. And so that was an area where we thought, hang on, do we need to maybe streamline this? Maybe just have like 1 or 2 choices rather than 15 different choices. And so that, again, is an area where, if you've got too many choices, particularly because you've got lots of different technology options, it might be we need some rules of engagement here. We need to simplify, streamline this so that we're not adding to that decision-making overload for our own human brains. But increasingly, if we go back to that quote that we had earlier, in the future, our jobs will be about the heart. So maybe if our jobs are about the heart, it's actually our emotional capacity that matters. So this is about emotional intelligence. This is about the quality of our relationships. And whether you work in a people-facing role or not, so if you're in care or hospitality or customer service, you'll know like this is really, really important. But even if you don't work in those areas, chances are you work with people. And so this is where our emotional intelligence or emotional capacity comes in. And when it comes to the quality of our relationships with each other, whether that's the people on your team or your clients, your suppliers, your stakeholders, your boss, this is where maybe actually the quality of relationships will impact on the quality of our conversations, how well we collaborate, how well we work together as a team, and the impact of our collective work together. And in fact, as technology advances, as robots and AI, become increasingly good at doing some of the manual or even some of the cognitive work, perhaps where we humans hold our own is still this area of working with our heart. But the thing is, our emotional capacity is probably even more limited than our mental capacity. So let's try this as a thought experiment. If I ask you to think of a fish, now an elephant, now a cup of tea, now a cucumber. Now imagine feeling excitement, now embarrassment, now rage, now joy. How did that feel? My guess is it probably takes longer to switch between the emotions compared to switching between the information. And so when we're just thinking of objects or things, it's easy to switch from a fish to an elephant. But when we're thinking of emotions, it's a lot harder to switch from excitement to embarrassment. And so our emotional processing takes longer to deal with than information processing. So that means that our emotional capacity is even more limited than our mental capacity, our cognitive capacity. And when we hit that limit, when we don't have enough emotional capacity, that's often where our lizard brain will kick in. So our lizard brain is the primitive part of our brain that's responsible for keeping us alive. And it does that by activating our fight or flight stress response. Really helpful when it's a genuine life or death situation, but probably less helpful in everyday work situations. So your lizard brain might be responsible for some of your procrastination. You know, when you look at your to-do list, you go, oh, I really don't want to do that. That's scary, that's hard, that's boring. Hey, look, emails, safe. I'll deal with these over here. That's your lizard brain kicking in. It might also be responsible for some of your email rage. Don't know if you've ever experienced email rage. It's like road rage, but with email. Yeah. Or if you've ever been on the receiving end of someone else's email rage, that feels a lot like being under attack. And so, one of the things that we need to do is, well, maybe first of all, just recognizing, when is my lizard brain kicking in? And a good acronym to remember is HALT, H-A-L-T, which is don't make any decisions when you are hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. I've shared this with lots of groups before, and sometimes people go, well, that leaves me a very, very limited window. But, if we think about it, sometimes, think back to that meeting that I talked about, like I can physically fit it in the diary. Maybe I've got the mental capacity, but have I got the emotional capacity? So maybe sometimes we need more space to switch from one thing to another. Maybe we need space to recover. If we've been through an emotionally intense conversation, maybe it's a difficult conversation with a colleague or a sensitive negotiation, or you're pitching to a new client, and like being in that space where you're pitching, you're on stage, that can be quite emotionally intense. Then you want your human brain showing up to that, not your lizard brain. So maybe we need to make sure we've got the capacity beforehand, so we're not running from one emotionally intensive thing to another. But also maybe we need recovery time afterwards to make sure that we can process that stuff and maybe get it out of our system and move on to the next thing. And so that's where recharge comes in. How do we recharge our capacity? So in that decision-making example with the parole board judges, the way they recharged their ability to make their best judgment decisions was by taking breaks. How often do we take a break? Particularly if we're working from home, like it can be really easy. If you're working from home, if you're working in the kitchen and you can like just reach into the cupboard to feed yourself, it could be you never move. And so it might be actually, what does it look like to have those regular breaks in the day? What would it look like to make sure I've got enough space for that recharge and recovery? But also, what's the thing that I can do that actually recharges me and restores my mental capacity and my emotional capacity? Because sometimes what happens is our downtime becomes a bit of an afterthought. It's like we reserve our best decision-making capacity for all the work decisions. And then when we finally get to the weekend or the evening or the holiday time, we're like, okay, what do I do now? And sometimes if we've hit decision fatigue by then, what we can end up doing is just almost defaulting to the junk food option. So it's like the thing that's convenient, that is easy, that I'll just go to that because that's easy to do. And I find the junk food option, whether that's actual food or something else, but it tends to make you feel good in the moment, but afterwards you feel worse. So it doesn't actually recharge you, it doesn't sustain you. And so maybe it is shifting our perspective on recharge, rather than seeing it as a luxury that we get around to when everything else is done. Maybe we need to start seeing this as fuel for our productivity. What's the thing that helps to recharge my mental capacity? What helps to recharge my emotional capacity? Actually, if that's how I do my best work, that's what I need to prioritize and put in first, especially if I've got one of those busy weeks coming up. So that gives you a little bit of a whistle-stop tour. And I know that we're going to be turning our conversation round now into, okay, that's what human capacity looks like. How does that work with technology? And we're going to dive into some questions and some discussions, and Ben's going to share some stuff as well. But just leave you with these two questions to consider. How does technology, or how does my use of technology help me either focus or fragment my mental capacity? And typically we'll be doing both. There'll be some things that help us to focus, but maybe some things that are fragmenting our capacity. But also, how do we use technology to release us to do the human work that matters? Maybe the stuff that machines can't do very well. So let me hand over to you, Ben.
Thank you very much, Grace. That's really, really helpful and interesting. I certainly know from personal experience that my lizard brain kicks in far too often. Yeah, I mean, like Grace alluded to in our final slide there, I mean, it's really clear to us at Mail Manager anyhow that technology can and really should be used to harness everyone to make sure that our jobs and our lives are easier, really. So we actually found that new research in the UK shows that SME owners and executives spend the equivalent of 2 working days per week carrying out administrative tasks and duties. So really that only leaves obviously 3 days for revenue building activities and things, you know, that you enjoy doing and actually earn the company money. So imagine if instead those hours were spent, you know, value adding client work. And really a key way to unlock your productivity superpowers is to by, you know, embracing technology, really. So especially in today's working world, where there is a constant pressure to get more work done in less time and what seems like less resources. So at Mail Manager, we believe the key to productivity lies in people, processes, and technology. So especially for the project and client-based businesses that we speak to, where information underpins all the work that you do, information visibility and accessibility is crucial for productive and efficient work. So while we, you know, the security and privacy, particularly for sensitive projects, is paramount for modern business day processes. Now, the PPT framework isn't new. I'm sure we've all heard of it or heard sort of variations on a similar theme. It's been around since the 60s, and the businesses have been using it for years to improve operational efficiencies. The people do the actual work, the process aims to make the work more efficient, and the technology is an enabler really to do the work faster and better and make it more productive. So all 3 legs of this tripod, that is the people, process, and technology, really rely on one another. So they're not independent by any stretch. So it's really important to keep in mind that the technology businesses choose to adopt to make lives easier really is only as effective as the people that are using it and the processes utilizing it. So your tech really needs to work for you, not against you. Far too many businesses we speak to invest in technology really to create a strategic or competitive advantage with no thought for the people or processes and how it might fit in. Then they really try and fit the people around the processes and into the technology, and the whole thing just sort of falls apart. So this results in low adoption. Often we see wasted money and a huge amount of underusage, and often a bit of barrier to change when it comes to investing in new processes and technologies beyond that initial investment. So for project and client teams, there's nothing worse than having a new technology thrust upon them, which actually causes more harm than good. And I suppose really when reflecting on your day-to-day, you might find that, you know, the unproductive time is spent communicating with or collaborating with various team members. And in fact, according to Jenica, poor communication costs companies around $62 million per year on average. But on the flip side, a new report published by the Centre for Digital Built Britain found that for every £1 invested in better information management processes, firms can potentially secure up to £6 of labour time savings. So for AEC industries that we predominantly speak to, particularly construction, information management can provide cost savings anywhere between 1.6% to 18% on a project. So obviously technology alone won't solve your productivity problems, but when done right, your team will be able to deliver faster and more productive and I suppose, yeah, the higher quality of work, which is ultimately what we're all striving for. I don't know, Grace, you know, when you speak to the people that you do and you know, the consultations that you do with different companies and clients, what are the personal experiences that you hear when it comes to utilizing technology to help enable productivity?
Yeah, it's a very similar story, Ben. One of the things that we talk about is psychology before technology, because it is so tempting to go, latest tech, that's what I need, install it, sort my life out. But one of the interesting things you touched on there was that adoption rate, that actually, whenever we introduce new technology, we're adding to the decisions we're having to make, because we're having to get used to a new process, a new way of doing things. Talk to any sales team that's just been given a new CRM system. It's like, oh no, I used to do this on autopilot and now I have to really think about it. So it's gonna take that investment of decision making. So that might inform how quickly do we roll this out. And when do we roll this out? Do we roll this out at the same time as increasing sales targets? Maybe let's not. Maybe give some time to bed it in first before. How do we support people in that adoption? Sometimes it's like people go straight to like enforcing, like you have to use this now, but maybe we need to engineer, like you say, the process around it, but also educate people in how to use it. And I think that's often the key thing that is missing when it comes to technology, is that collective understanding of how are we going to use this tool. So for example, a lot of the workshops we go in to do when we do our Getting Your Inbox to Zero workshop, people go, we've never had training on email. Like, yes, we know, this is the count, this is how we press the button, this is how it connects and everything, but we've never had training on how do we use email well as a way to communicate and collaborate, rather than this thing that distracts us and stops us from being able to get our best work done.
Yeah, and that's kind of mind-blowing, isn't it? Given that the poll we put up earlier, email was by and far the main thing that distracts people. So we hear that a lot, absolutely. As far as email being that productivity drain, and this I suppose leads on to what we were talking about there, is the data volume continues to increase exponentially. I think we're all aware of that. It just seems that we're sending and receiving a ridiculous number of email, and that's only going in one direction. The disorganized approach to information management really can leave project teams stressed and significantly hinder your productivity. Like you say, Grace, it's just another thing to think about. It's another decision to be made. So in 2020, just to kind of run through some statistics that we found that we thought were particularly interesting, Forbes found that 95% of surveyed business reported the need to manage unstructured data, and that was a huge problem for their business and the running of their day-to-day companies. And a great deal of this data particularly comes via email, as we know. So email's ongoing prevalence is really hard to debate and ignore. The majority of people use email for more than 80% of their project correspondence, and it's preferred the communication tool for 73% of business professionals. So as a result, the average office worker receives 88 emails a day and sends 33, which is, as I say, only going in one direction, which is supported by this fact. So which adds up to roughly, kind of one email every 12 minutes. But in fact, 333.2 billion emails were sent and received every day in 2022. With this number expected to increase to 376.4 billion in 2025. So really finding specific data within this massive email communication is a difficult task that increases in complexity upon completing projects and client information and work as people move on from a company. And this really isn't helped by businesses not having the tools in place to enable them to discover and unlock this information. Unfortunately, many businesses, certainly the ones that we speak to on a day-to-day basis, leave it to their employees to manage their own inboxes. Like you say, Grace, when you go and speak to companies, very seldom have they had any sort of training on how to use email in a productive way. So this inevitably leads to people using different versions and naming formats and filing information to different folders, which can make it difficult to retrieve in the event of disputes. Plus, it's a massive productivity drain as teams waste precious time searching for emails and documents. I'd love to really, for those on the call, just similar to we did when Grace was running through some of her slides, just launch a quick poll, I suppose, to get a bit of an understanding of how much time people estimate that they sort of spend every day checking their emails. Now, I think this will be really interesting. I imagine people haven't sort of sat down and started the timer and finished it when replying and going through everything, but it'd be interesting to launch this poll nonetheless to kind of see a bit of a gauge on what people estimate.
I'm wondering how many people are doing it right now.
Well, quite exactly, or at least seeing the notification on their phone, having a quick look at a couple of things. So we've had a good number of answers, and I suppose fairly unsurprisingly, if I just end this poll here and share those results, can you see those on screen, Grace?
Yeah. Yeah, so I can see there's like 2 to 3 hours is the highest, 65% of people saying 2 to 3 hours. But we've also got 17% are saying up to 4 to 5 hours a day. Oh man, And then some are saying 1 to 2, and then we've got a small percentage of saying less than an hour.
The lucky few, I would argue. Well, that's, I suppose, interesting, but certainly not unsurprising. And I imagine a lot of that is out of your traditional business hours as well, checking those emails first thing when you wake up and last thing before you go to bed. But yeah, that's a vast proportion, like Grace says, sort of 2 to 3 hours a day. If I just take that off, so the next slide I was going to go through is just really on the missing piece of the puzzle. So information management is slowly but surely becoming more standardized by companies. So allowing for early detection, reduced risk of mistakes, resulting in added benefits and less rework ultimately, and reduced costs. That's certainly what we hear from the companies that we're speaking to, that have taken the time to have a look at a different way of doing it. But email management really can't be forgotten. And when it's done right, it really allows for teams to use their time and resources and knowledge to make the right decisions at the right time, fulfill their roles efficiently. There's that word again, efficiency and efficiently. So unfortunately, unless companies have the right technology, their tools and processes in place, everyone in the organization manages their emails differently. While some project and client teams are diligent in filing their business critical correspondence, others don't file at all. And there's always a spectrum, and I'd probably argue that most sort of sit bang in the middle of that. So really, we've focused a lot of time and a lot of our productivity on the side of things really today to make sure that companies can reduce their risk. And by committing to this holistic email management and information management approach, you can have confidence in your information, knowing that it's always complete and up to date. You can remove this time wasted on onerous admin tasks and be comfortable that you have all the information to hand and ensure really that your team is fully equipped to make the right decisions. So just a couple of slides. I want a bit of background on who we are, and some of you on the call might be more than aware of this, but we are a email management tool developed for and by Arup. And for those of you that might not know, Arup are a multidisciplinary engineering firm. And really the issue that Arup saw with their information management was massively on productivity, but also the inconsistencies. Like we touched on already a couple of times, there's always a spectrum in every company we speak to, those that are really tight on filing into their own inbox, those that are less so, and probably the majority that sit in between. As a company, we were becoming really concerned with the risk of losing sensitive information, but probably from a more day-to-day approach, it was how much time are our team spending on their fee earning works, bidding for projects, stuff, information, or rather completing jobs that earn the company money, fee earning work, and how do we minimize those distractions? How do we really reduce those lizard brains taking over and making sure that people can focus on the things that they need to be? So that's really where Mail Manager was born. We ended up developing it for our own team initially, and it was massively successful. It started to snowball a bit, as these things often do. Companies we worked with very closely at the time and had a lot of joint ventures with decided to adopt it as well, as they looked around their own offices and at their own colleagues and thought, yeah, there's a massive issue here with distraction and drain on productivity. So what are the issues we hear from our clients? We've gone over this in a good bit of detail, but I think that third bubble there, wasting time spent filing and searching emails manually, is, probably the thing we hear more than most, pretty much in 100% of the calls that I have with new businesses that are evaluating Mail Manager for themselves. So Mail Manager is the email management solution that removes mundane email admin tasks, really that eat into your time and keep you from having to archive and think about archiving those emails. It integrates with Outlook, so you can effortlessly continue to use the tools that you have been doing for the last 2 decades. Some of you, I'm sure, in the same way that you've managed email since you started using it. The solution means that you can now maximize the functionality within the Microsoft tools and automate the filing directly from your inbox. And the main challenges that we solve around the risk of mismanaged information, which result in losing disputes and productivity information visibility, and really increasing your privacy and compliance too. Like I mentioned, the system would fit into your existing IT setup, and it standardizes the way that everyone can capture your projects and important email conversations. Just a quick touched on who uses Mail Manager. Now, there's a pretty eclectic group of clients on screen there, and we wanted to make sure that we cast a wide net there, but I'm sure there are some familiar brands and some familiar faces on screen as to who benefits from Mail Manager across financial services, legal, defense, you name it. Any company that bears the burden of having to manage email day to day can benefit from the system. And a couple of quotes from our clients as well. People that spend 7 days a week, often 24/7, having to think about filing, reading their emails, being distracted constantly when they're spend time with their family and away from work. This is something we hear a lot from our clients. Cliff McCormack, before using Mail Manager, on a day-to-day when he knew no one was sending emails, for instance, a Saturday morning, he would spend 4 hours filing emails, which is massively frustrating. A couple of other quotes from some of our clients. This one from Jeff says that Mail Manager saves around 10 to 20% of staff's time, improving their efficiency from staff looking into emails, which means they can now respond on the call instead of having to search for information and get back to later. So, obviously massively helping with project and client conversations there. And finally, before I hand over, because I've got half an eye on these Q&As here that are coming through, so I can hand over and Grace can help me out with some of those. The final quote we've got from Brian Faulkner, who's a principal at Severed Associates, says, "Personally for me, it saves at least an hour a day, and that applies for most of our senior staff. It was difficult to find information I wasn't copied in, and now it's simple, and I can find any email I want to within a matter of seconds." So, like I say, we've got a good couple of questions here. I haven't read through all of them. I've got a good lengthy one here from Mark, so I'll kind of read it out. And Grace, if you want to jump in, then please feel free to do so. What are your thoughts on this? Mark says, recently a thought leader declared that email is dead because it had developed into I can't even know what that says. Utilitarian means to transmit documentation or information to people in a one very dimensional way. The thought leader has said that most people have no capacity or interest for receiving emails for any other purpose. I don't know if Grace, if you'd heard that before.
I was just busy sort of laughing away at that, and I didn't realize I was still on mute. Yeah, I definitely get that sentiment, and it's interesting because I think email has definitely earned a very bad rep, and for a lot of people, just even the thought of email is like, oh. So I can definitely see that, like when you log in, if you're swamped with lots of emails, it just all feels like it's just bombarded, with information. Nobody's listening to me. It's just one way. And yet we still haven't managed to get rid of email. So we're still using email in some way, shape or form to communicate and collaborate, albeit sometimes badly. So yeah, I can understand that kind of perspective to go, actually, is email dead? Can we use something else instead? And I know some organizations have tried that. Some organizations have tried, let's move some of those real-time conversations into other places like Slack or Teams. Maybe we can have more of that two-way conversation rather than just being a one-way broadcast. But the same challenges are there as well. I'm hearing from people, actually, my Teams notifications are even more distracting than my email notifications. Or you get people kind of going, okay, we're working asynchronously a lot these days. So we're working, maybe on the same project, but at different times in different places. So, we've got this situation where communication is our only way of bringing those things together. And in that space, sometimes you've got that situation where you've got, leave me alone, I'm trying to focus. And I've got all these pings coming in. But at the same time, you've also got someone going, why is nobody listening to me? Nobody's replying to my emails, or nobody's replying to my whatever message. And sometimes we're that same person, in both those things. So that's why it comes back to whether you're using email or another channel or a range of channels, which channel do you use for what thing? What kind of conversation is it for? What kind of communication is it for? Is it a broadcast? Is it two-way? How can we make that clearer? But also, what are the expectations around responsiveness? Because if we think efficiency is about doing everything faster, then we end up making, we're basically requiring all our human beings to just jump on stuff. Whereas actually, if we start redefining the rules to go, okay, so yes, it can do things really quickly, but as human beings, we're only expected to maybe look at this once a day, or this 3 times a day, or this thing, it's as and when, and we can maybe agree when we jump on and have that instant communication, but other times when we can go dark and have that stealth and camouflage, then we create the space that we need as human beings to do our best work.
Yeah, I think that's well, you've answered that very well, Grace. I would totally agree with everything you said there. And I think actually to speak to your point, or your question rather, Mark, as well, I'd probably go back to one of the slides that I showed earlier as far as the hard stats. And it's a really good point, and I'm glad you wrote the question out, because we hear, or rather I've heard that quite a lot, email will be dead in 3 years, or we're kind of phasing off. That's just not what we're seeing. Unfortunately for some people, and probably most people on the call, the vast majority of projects and clients and communication that way is still done through email, and it's not reducing by any stretch. Yes, people are using Slack and Teams, but I think just the volume of communication in general is going up rather than kind of one replacing the other. But yeah, that's a really interesting point.
One of the things we can do is just increase our thoughtfulness. So yeah, absolutely, you do. Does it have to be an email? If email is our default mode of communication, sometimes asking, actually, if I really want to get someone's attention, is email the best way of doing that? Or could I get creative? Could I use a different way, a maybe more multi-dimensional way? So to go back to your one-dimensional point, could I use a different way of getting people's attention or rallying people around this thing?
Absolutely. We've got a couple of questions that are pointed right towards Mail Manager, so I'll tackle those, and then I've spotted one that might be maybe a bit of a tricky one for you to answer, Grace, but I'll ask it anyhow. So as far as the Mail Manager questions are concerned, so there's some on free trials of Mail Manager. Absolutely, we can offer that. So we offer free 15-day trials. Please feel free to get in contact. There'll be an email. In fact, I'll put it up now. So yeah, I'll get onto our website or send myself an email, ben.thomas@ideagen.com. Then yeah, please feel free to do that if you want to learn more about that. Are non-project related emails and sensitive emails accessible by everyone? Someone asked with Mail Manager. So the short answer is you have with the system all the control that you need to. So there will be, for some of you on the call, or rather all of you on the call, some areas that only certain people can access, maybe on a server or a SharePoint or a shared team channel, that sort of thing. When you link those folders to Mail Manager, we will just mirror those permissions, and we would do the setup for you and help you do that to make sure that your sensitive client information or anything commercial or anything HR related remains accessible to the people that need to see it, but more importantly, those that can't and shouldn't see it, they won't be able to. So hopefully that answers that question as well. There's a question, perhaps it was from Alison, and it's perhaps directed at yourself, Grace, and it might be a bit of a challenging one, but how do you go about reducing meetings when you have a large volume of clients?
Great question. So maybe it's similarly to the email thing. Are we defaulting to meetings? What are our default behaviors around meetings? So if it's like, okay, we've got a client and we always put in a monthly check-in meeting or a weekly check-in, whatever that looks like, what's the default behavior? So notice that first, and then maybe ask, like, what's the purpose of this? And going through the exercise of actually describing the purpose of the meeting, and getting really clear about what's the outcome that we want. Is this meeting to agree something, or to discuss, or to explore, or to identify the issues and things like that? So what's the purpose of this meeting? And most people go, yeah, we kind of know why we're meeting. But if you actually go through the exercise of writing down a purpose statement for each of the meetings you've got, you might find there are certain ones where maybe you don't need an hour, you only need 10 minutes, or maybe you don't need it to be that often, or maybe it's actually, we don't need all 50 people in that meeting, we can just have 5. So I'd say start there, start by identifying, and again, I guess increasing our thoughtfulness around meetings as well. What is it for? What's that purpose statement? And then from there, you can maybe just decide, is this meeting needed at all? Does it need to be this long? Does it need to be this often? And does it need to have everybody in it that's currently on that invite list?
Excellent. That's excellent advice. So a couple of more, and apologies if we don't get around to everyone's questions. There's a really good number in here, which is fantastic, and we'll make sure to reach out to those of you that we couldn't answer these questions. So there was one on, where have I put it here? It was on when people leave. Here we go. So what happens to these emails when people leave the business? Are duplicate emails filed as well? That's a really good point. And I suppose that comes down to, we hear it a lot actually on a productivity point. If someone replaces another person or there's a project handover, what happens to those emails? Where is that handover process? So with Mail Manager, and we've had clients come to us and say, well, we've got 5-6 inboxes from colleagues that have left the company that are just sort of sitting there dormant almost. We have to keep them open just in case, the proverbial hits the fan and we need to be able to go back and find those conversations. So with Mail Manager, you can bulk file retrospectively, so you can historically find those. And if someone leaves that's been using the system, then all of the emails have been filed at the right time. So all of that up-to-date information is accessible by everyone. So yeah, we can run you through exactly how that would work in a more in-depth meeting, but hopefully that answers that. I might ask just one more question of yourself, Grace. And I suppose this, and you might have some, I'm sure you've got very good insight from the clients that you've worked with before. Someone just asked, do you find a lack of downtime negatively affects work? Quite a broad question, but I'm sure it's the short answer.
In a nutshell, yes. So different ways that it will affect. So let's say, let's look at, the mental capacity side of things. If you've got a lack of downtime, what happens with our mental capacity is we hit decision fatigue. So we're not able to make good judgment decisions. So then we might just go to our defaults rather than, actually think about it. But from an emotional capacity point of view, also what you'll notice is, workplace related stress, for example, and that might result in physical capacity. That might result in somebody being off work due to stress, but also it can result in things like unproductive behavior. So that email rage can get contagious. In fact, even things like so basic things like sleep, for example. If we're sleep deprived, if we're not sleeping enough, the cognitive impairment is equivalent to being drunk. And so that's going to affect our judgment, our decision making, but it also affects our lizard brain. So our lizard brain becomes twice as sensitive, so more likely to jump into that email rage, but also it's like almost like the brakes go off, like our ability to spot, hang on a minute, I'm experiencing the email rage, step away from the computer, do not press send, like that stops working. And so you can imagine how much disruption in that sense happens when people are stressed, when people aren't feeling great, when people aren't making good judgment decisions. And then also there's that disengagement factor as well. I know I love the work that I do, but if I'm squeezed too much and I don't have enough downtime, I stop enjoying my work. I start resenting, there's another person I need to talk to, another thing I need to deliver. And I know those are warning signs for me that I've squeezed everything in too tight. And that's what happens if we prioritize efficiency, sometimes it becomes deficiency because we're squeezing out the stuff that helps us to show up at our best and do our best human work.
That's a really good point and a perfect point, I think, to conclude on as well. Like I say, there's a load of other questions that have come through, and apologies, guys, we are kind of coming up towards our hour mark here. So I want to leave this as our last slide, and I want to firstly thank you very much, Grace. It's been really good and interesting talking to you. If anyone would like to learn more about what Grace does, here is her website. I would encourage all of you to visit and reach out to Grace and her team of ninjas as well. But like I say, if anyone wants to learn anything more from the mail management perspective, then feel free to do the same and visit our website. But yeah, Grace, thank you very much for your time.
Absolute pleasure, Ben. Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.